Good evening. This is the July meeting of the Chicago Computer Society Linux SIG number 2. Tonight we're going to have really just Bob Primick giving additional topics covering background of upgrading Linux, etc., as well as how to manipulate and use PDF documents. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Bob Primick and let him carry it on from there.
Yeah, the first thing I want to do, since we do have one person here, is ask Pete, have you been doing anything in Linux where you need any reviews of installing or upgrading?
Not at this point. My one system seems to be doing pretty good itself.
Okay. Any programs you've got any interest in knowing more about?
I'm pretty static with Linux right now.
Yeah.
I've been pretty busy, so haven't had a lot of time to play.
Okay, well, then I guess the only thing that I can do then, if I can screen share, I don't know. I think Tim might have, yeah. Let me see if I can share my desktop. All right. Now, some of us have PDF documents that we receive from time to time, and I'm no different from anybody else in that regard. What I want to do is to show some ways of handling PDF that I have used.
Hey, Bob,
yeah.
I'm interrupting you only because the view we see, we've got two large black areas.
The one black area is you guys.
Yes, you got to try and move that, slide it over. Grab the top and slide it over.
That any better?
Well, it's up in the corner anyway. Can you get the middle one in the middle of the screen? That's where you probably have the...
What's in the middle of the screen?
Top probably is the stop sharing and other options. Yeah, right where you're at.
I will not be able to do anything if I get rid of that.
Okay.
Because the controls are already hidden. They already self-hid themselves.
Well, I mean, this is a problem even APCUG quite often has. All right, continue.
I don't think it's going to get in the way of any application windows. But we'll see whether it does. Anyway, for handling PDF documents, I just want to show a couple of things that people very frequently will do. And one of the things is if you have an email, you might want to be able to download something as PDF. Sometimes there are attachments, but most email services have a print option, and the print has a save as PDF. So I'm just going to save this little email that we got. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and it's just going to be a download from email. And then we can open it in another application, and we'll see what's going on with it. Except...
There you go.
Maybe there. Now it'll let me do that. I have to be in frame. Okay, so from the desktop, I'm not sure where this is going to come up. Yes, I do have a PDF viewer. This is Linux Mint Cinnamon, and it will show me the PDF document. I think I'll full screen it, and we can see all the various pages of the PDF document as it came downloaded. But the fact of the matter is, I probably, well, this is going to be really messy if I do try to save just one page of it. I think the main meeting announcement is what I'll try to save. And so I'm going to need a tool that allows me to do that. So what I have, there are several tools that are available. Those who do Windows probably know something about PDF SAM, PDF Split and Merge, which is a single package in Windows, and it contains a Java runtime. And I don't want to put Java into my Linux because it's a huge amount of stuff to add. It would be both storage, both disk overhead, and it would also be system overhead to run it. But just so you can see what's available, there is a PDF SAM that is available for Linux. It can be downloaded this way, or even though the Linux Mint installer isn't a good way to find software. So what you would do is you would do a search in Synaptic. This is the Synaptic Package Manager. And if you do a search for PDF SAM, it has this. And let me show you what happens if you're going to install it. Unlike most package managers that you'll get with Linux distros, Synaptic will show you what dependencies you're going to be installing. And so if I mark it for installation, this doesn't actually install it yet. This is what's going to be installed, a lot of Java. I'm not going to actually do this, but this would be Java 9 because we are doing a Linux that is based on the 2004 LTS. We would get Java 11 perhaps if we were doing the upcoming Linux Mint 21 that is going to be based on the 2204 LTS kernel. So I'm going to cancel this, but that's basically what you do. So if you did want to install it, you would simply click Mark, and there'd be a whole bunch of other things that would be marked, and then there'd be an Apply button if you were going to do that. There's another PDF handler that's more specialized, but it's called PDF Arranger. That can also be gotten here. Now there's PDF Shuffler, and PDF Arranger is a fork of it. And if I wanted to install it this way as a deb, I would, as a Debian package, I would do this. And if I did that, there's a couple of things that would be installed with it, but that's not too bad. However, I'm not going to go into what they are, but I did install mine as a flat pack. So it does operate a little differently. So there are also some things about PDF SAM Basic, where if you go to the website, you can read about what it is. And it does have features that the program I'm going to use doesn't have. But I'll be able to do pretty much what I want to with this program and a couple of others. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on my little download here, and I'm going to open it with PDF Arranger. And it will show me 4 pages. The only page I want is going to be, I think, here it's number 2. So what I'm going to do is I'll open a new window. And I'll move that window over here. And I just take this page and drag it over here. It is now copied into a new document, which I will now save. And let's just give it a name. Linux SIG announce. And 2022 July. Okay, we'll just put that, I'm going to put it on my desktop so that I can find it. And right now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. I haven't done anything. I actually have taken a page out of here, but I'm not going to save it that way because I don't want to. So now this is what it will look like in my PDF viewer. And this is just the standard viewer. I don't want this whole paragraph here. I don't want that. So how am I going to get rid of it? I'm going to have to do some editing. There are two programs that can be used for editing that I really like to use. In this case, I'm going to see what happens in LibreOffice Draw. There is one major problem with LibreOffice Draw. It does not always render PDF documents properly. We'll see what happens here. LibreOffice Draw. And here it is. This does render properly. I've had some documents that showed up with overprinting. And that is probably because there is overprinting in the original. Sometimes bold is handled in PDF as overprinting, which is an additional layer. And that can really get messed up in LibreOffice Draw. Now what I'm going to do is, so you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm going to zoom to 200%. And I'm going to take this piece that I don't want here. And if I'm lucky, yes, it recognizes this as a text box. Each line is being recognized as its own text box. And if I just hit a delete button on my keyboard, that's gone. And let's do this again with the next line. That's not going to do that. What it's done is it's gone inside the line. And I want to do that. Get the whole line. Now I'm going to, you don't save in LibreOffice Draw. You export as PDF. Not directly, because that can cause problems. Export as PDF. And don't change anything. You can if you want, if you know what you're doing. I don't, so I'm not going to. And I'm going to go onto the desktop, and I'm going to, the announcement, I'm going to modify the title here and just say that the announcement is modified. And we'll save it. And let's see what we did. Don't save. So this is the modified announcement. And here it is. Everything's been preserved, all the formatting, it's just fine. Now I might not want this little page number either, and I can do the same thing with the page number. And so let's open with LibreOffice Draw. And I think I'm going to have to, yeah. Okay, it decided to play a little game with me.
I don't blame it.
Let's just, new drawing. And I'm going to do this. There we are. Now, open, and the one, this is another way of opening a document from within the program. And it's going to be from the desktop. And it's going to be the announcement modified. Let's just open it that way. Now, let me magnify this so that you can see what I'm going to work on. Zoom. Let's go 200%, and it's going to be somewhere over here. This is the thing I didn't want. So let's see if it wants to highlight. I'm lucky. It will highlight. And that's what we're doing. Get rid of it.
You might want the top line out too. Very top of the document.
At the very top, I'm not sure. If I don't want the entire, if I don't want that, I'm not sure I don't want it though, for my purpose. Some people might not want this. Oh, yeah, we probably want to get rid of the identifying stuff. So let's just get rid of Bert's email so that he retains his privacy. And let's go back here and get rid of on. Like that. And we can now do something, hopefully. I'm just going to add a couple of dashes here. And like that. So you can do quite a bit of editing. Although you can't do all the kinds of text editing and fancy things that you can do in a couple of other programs if you need to do things like form filling or something of that nature. Now I'm going to export this again. And I think I'm going to export it under the same file name because I don't want to have tons of copies. So now we're going to replace. And there we go. Don't save. And you noticed that there was a little clock that showed up here as the thumbnail updated. And that meant that the document was updating. And let's see what it did. So here's the date and time. And here's the meeting announcement. And that's all it is. We got rid of all the stuff that we didn't want. And that's really great. Now, let's suppose that I have a document, and for some reason I want to combine two PDF documents. And what I'm going to try to do is, let me see what I've got. I think I want to go in here. And I'm not sure. Yeah, it'll be in documents. This is just something that I showed up in Northwest Suburban, and it's going to be, there's a Shields Up PDF, and this was probably adapted from a slideshow that Ed did at Northwest. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this with PDF Arranger. At the same time, I am going to open, at the same time, I want to have something else added. So I open a file and append is what I want to do. And this is going to be from documents. And it's going to be, Are Your Shields Up? That PDF. I'm opening that. Now I have two things. And one of them is definitely the slideshow and the other is some kind of a summary. So they're two different documents. The fact of the matter is, I think probably this document ought to come last, not first. So let's rearrange. Highlight what I don't want to be leading. I'm going to cut this. Now this is the lead. And down here, paste after. And now I've got this document appended to this document. Now, here's the interesting part. I'll just either save or export. I could export pages to individual files. That's useful if you're going to edit with a program like Inkscape, which can only handle one page at a time, or Draw, which can only handle one page at a time. So you might need to do that on occasions. But right now, I'm just going to save it. And I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'm going to save it as Shields Up, CISA, Northwest Suburban CCS. I don't like dashes in Linux file names. That can confuse some programs. And I don't like the date format. I always lead with the year because of the way that makes a directory sort, and it will sort so that The year will be grouped together, the month will be grouped together, and the dates will be consecutive. And I don't want that to be a dash, I want it to be an underline. That's what I think I want. Now I'm going to save that. It may take some time. And do that. Okay, so now what have I got? I've got, are your shields up? And then at the end of that, I've got the shields up CISA document. And it's all one document. Now suppose I receive a document that way, and I don't want the two documents to be together. I want to split them up. So I will open up with PDF Arranger, and I will open a new window. Put the new window here. And what I'm going to do, since it's a shorter document, I'll take these pages and I'm going to cut them and paste them over here. It doesn't matter whether it's paste after, because that's what's going to happen. You're always going to want to think of what page do you want to paste it after. Like if I want to take page 14 and copy it, and I want to put it in between these two pages. If I do paste after, that's what happens. But I can also drag and drop. Now it's where I would have wanted it, if I wanted it there. So those are all ways of doing things, and you can always save the result. Save as, and I'm just going to call it the B copy. And we'll just save that. And then I'll show you what these two look like when I finish saving them. The other thing is, I don't know whether you can do this, but I want to change the page numbering. Let me see if I can easily do that. Save as and save. Rotate. I can also rotate. So if I have a page that I want to rotate, I can rotate it. Put it upside down. Do anything I want. 90-degree rotations. And if I want to see something a little larger, I can plus it. And I can minus it, so that I can take a look at what I'm doing. What I don't know is whether or not I can page number. Whether I can renumber the pages. Okay. Let me just see whether or not I can. I can also insert a blank page if I want one anywhere. For example, if I want a blank page, I can do that. Now I've got a blank page, and I can put stuff onto that blank page if I want to edit. And so that's basically, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this document. And it's just going to be desktop, shields up by, instead of the B form, that'll be C. And we'll just save that way. And it is saved. Now we can see what we've done. This is the B form, and that's just got the slideshow basically. And that goes, actually this seems to have everything. Let me see what happened here. This is the document I created from that document. And this, For some reason, I did not end up, let me see what that's doing. I'm going to reopen it with PDF Arranger because that should have, oh, I know. This was the page I inserted from the other document. That's what's confusing me. And we'll just save the changes, replace, and now we'll see what we got. This will come out with this page inserted, but otherwise it's the slideshow with just that page inserted. So that is PDF Arranger, and a little bit about how LibreOffice Draw enters into it. Now, what I'd like to do, if I had a form to fill, there's another little trick I could do. Let me open this with, I'm going to open this with PDF Arranger, and I'm going to open a new window, and I'm going to take this piece here, and I'm just going to save this. And that's going to be the cover sheet. And I'm going to treat this as something where I might want to fill in, I'm not going to save the changes here. I might want to fill in a form. So now I'm going to use Inkscape. Now, Inkscape can be obtained any of a number of ways, but I think what I did was I just simply installed it from, I installed it from a Debian package, and it's probably from a PPA. I know we're not supposed to be doing too much with PPAs because you can get into real trouble if you go to one that you really can't trust. You have to know that you can trust the PPA that you're using. But in the case of Inkscape, it's quite trustworthy. It's on their website, and I will just call that up for you in my browser so we know what we're doing. And this is the one that I want, the most recent. And there is Linux. And I could have used an app image, but there's also a PPA. And for this, they give you a command line way of adding the repository. Because it comes from inkscape.org, it's safe. And then do the update and do the install of the package. And then it will become one of your software sources. And when you fire up your installer and do your refresh, if there's an update, it'll show up here. And right now, I'm probably not going to have any updates because I just updated today. But we'll just watch our update manager, and there isn't anything. But there would be if there were a new version of even something that came from a PPA. That gets included in your normal updates. So, open with Inkscape. And there's all kinds of stuff that it does. In Inkscape, I can do things like I can create shapes that are either filled or not filled. And what I want to do is I want to change the color of this object, and let's make it sort of that color. Now, I suppose that I wanted to do something like add a signature. That's under draw freehand lines. If I had my drawing tablet, I could do this really neatly. And I can just do something like sign. although signing with a mouse is awkward. But another thing I can do is I can draw a calligraphic line. And what that is going to do, let's make it in black and do it over. Well, it isn't going to want to let me do that. It should, but it didn't. All right, let's try that. But you get the idea that you can do things like calligraphic, and right now I've got that very thin, but I can make it more calligraphic. If you were doing invitations or something like that, that's a nice thing to be able to do, use calligraphy. And you can either draw freehand or you can do other things. You can also add some text. And if I wanted to, I could change this to some other kind of text. Let's see which one. Where's the... All right. Yeah, I think I'm going to... I have a few choices, but let's say that... let's do that one. So that changes that, and we can also do text in various colors. Now, why that did that, I don't know.
You inverted it.
Yeah, I did, and it wasn't supposed to do that. Let me start over on this. Let me do another text box. And let me do on brown. Okay, it doesn't want to let me do that. Okay, let's do that. All right, now let's select another color. Let's suppose that's the one we want. No, it's not going to do that. Okay, well, anyway, there are things you can do in Inkscape. And let me try one last thing. All right, spacing, blah, blah, blah. Well, Inkscape may not let me do colorful things here, but in any event, that's some of the stuff that you can do with Inkscape. And then the file can be saved or it can be exported. I think I want to export it, and I want to export it as a PDF, if it'll do that. Now, this is the problem. Inkscape will not export anything other than an image format.
No, you got PDF right there. It said portable.
Oh, just a moment. No, portable network.
No, it
Graphic,
said portable
PNG.
PDF. I saw it listed.
Portable network graphic is PNG and it's not PDF. Ah, here it is.
Yeah.
PDF. Yeah, now we can do it. Okay, so I'm exporting it and let's replace. Now, let me see if I can get out of Inkscape. Yeah, I can do that. I'm not going to save Inkscape away. All right, let's see what it says now. And this is what it looks like. So I was able to do these things, and I did get some brown text, but for some reason it reversed itself. I don't know. So you can modify the PDF documents when you want to or when you need to. And you can also take the document here with PDF Arranger and let me add open a file independent. And what I want is the page 1. Now I'm going to bring this page 1 up and I'm going to put it first. And I'm going to take this and I'm just going to delete it. When you delete, the page numbers will change appropriately. They will adjust. And now, let me save as. And I'm going to make that C.
No, you already got a C.
Then we'll do it D. Okay, it would have told me. Okay, keeping me honest here. So now let's get the, let's see, that's the B, that's the C, I,
It's up above.
there it is, that's the D. And so now I've got this whole thing with this new modified page. And that's what you often have to do if you have a form that you have to fill as part of a PDF document. And then you can do whatever exporting or uploading you need to do. PDF documents can be printed very easily. That's what they were originally made for. And that's basically what I was going to show about PDF handling. So, that leaves us with quite a little bit of extra time. Let me see if there was anything else on my list of things that we might be doing. I did that already. I do have a few topics, but before I get into them, let me stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to add about PDF handling. How does everybody else handle PDFs? Is there something else you guys do?
I think the Libre writer will take it in, and you can fill out forms that way too.
Let's see whether we can. I will share my screen and we'll see whether some of these things will open in Writer. Let's just take the announcement and open with, let's say, other application, and we want to go with LibreOffice Writer, you say.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, all right, you want to do this. And let's do that. And this is now in, no, LibreOffice will not do that. You cannot open it in Writer unless, let's open Writer and see if it can open the file. I'm thinking it cannot in modern versions of LibreOffice.
Well, in the last month, I modified one that was a form, PDF form. So I don't know.
Okay. Let's take the announcement again. This is a PDF. We'll try to open it. And it does not open in, no, it does not open in Writer. It opens in Draw. That is absolutely hard-coded. So, no, it has to be, you see, there are different kinds of PDFs. Some PDFs are single image. And single image PDF will not open in any word processor. Whereas forms that are meant to be filled can be opened as documents. And they're just different kind of PDF.
Okay.
They've got different formatting and different coding. And I'm pretty sure the same thing would be true of any of these. If I wanted to open this with anything else, and I selected LibreOffice Writer, it opens in Draw. Actually, what are we opening? I was wrong about Draw. Draw has been changed. You can do multiple pages. But this is Draw. And Draw is the way that you would make changes. But look at this. This is a typical artifact that LibreOffice Draw has. And it is a blank white box that you're not going to be able to do anything with it. It has not rendered correctly because it's a PDF. And that is a chronic problem that I've run into with LibreOffice Draw. It has limitations like that. I've had a lot better luck if I first split up the document into individual pages and handle just one page at a time in Draw. But sometimes that same artifact will show up. And sometimes you can correct for it, sometimes I can't. So I'm not sure. There may actually be some kind of an add-on to LibreOffice that allows you to import into LibreOffice Writer, because I don't see an import function here.
Look at tools.
Yeah. Just a moment. Tools. Okay. Tools does not have that unless it is options. Nope. It does not have that. Let's see if there's form. No, it's not going to be under form either. I do not believe there is an import function any longer. There's an export, but no import for PDF. Now, there's one other way we can find out. It'll take just a minute. And that is we can ask Google whether there is a way. Let's do it like that. Nope. All right, let's see if everything says draw, not writer. You can embed a PDF file, but you can't do that. LibreOffice does not have native capability to open or import random PDF files into a writer document.
Well,
There are
mine,
some that you might. There are some you might.
Document in
What?
a browser? Could you open the document in a browser and then save it from there?
If I open it in a browser and save it, it's just going to save it as PDF. It's not going to change how it's handled by LibreOffice. No. In other words, what you want to do is see if we can open it with. Yeah, the browser isn't even listed.
no, I thought I saw the emblem of Chromium rather.
Oh, here, Chromium. And what you want to do is then do what?
Save it a different way?
It's either save as PDF or nope. There isn't anything else. LibreOffice does not have that capability. I mean, it would be nice if it did, but it doesn't seem to. Okay, so that's what I had on PDF. Let me stop sharing here. Anything else people want to know or that you've done with PDFs? Okay, so that would be all that I had on that. I do have some interesting articles which will take just a little time to go through. And one of them has to do with how to get help from how to get the best out of Linux forums. In Linux, if you want to get help, you're probably going to want to go to a forum or something of that nature. And in forums, there have been some issues. I'm going to share my browser so that I can bring up something. Now, let me bring up. Let's see if this will be the one. I think what I wanted to do okay. There is I don't want to do this way. I'm going to use the other link. Let's see if this has it. When you go to forums, it used to be that technical users who use these forums would look down on less knowledgeable newcomers, and they would really get snarky about the fact that you have to learn about Linux before you can ask that question, or it's too simple a question to answer, things of that nature.
Or
And-
RTFM.
Yeah, they send you to the man pages, which are very often not well documented for newcomers. And they don't really tell you that there are some tutorials online, but they just don't want to answer simplistic questions. So what this article is saying is this has had a detrimental effect on the entire internet culture from time to time. There is a tension that most people aren't aware of, even though it is an undercurrent that frames all of our online interactions now. There was something called the Eternal September, which is a 1993 move by America Online to allow its users into the free-for-all that was the Usenet. Usenet was used by more technical people because it was more difficult to get into and more difficult to learn how to use it. But that move created some tension between technical users and non-technical users. And that some of that tension lingers today in forums, including Linux forums. So what happened was the move that AOL made created quite a bit of chaos because now there was mainstream interest in the internet, and it began to overwhelm the early discussion forums, which had attracted more technical users, and they were usually talking in terms that were very technical and that most regular users wouldn't have understood. So internet culture at that time was really struggling to deal with newcomers who were called noobs. People who there were the online equivalent of a sneer that awaited people as they hit the internet on ramp. According to the article, there are other ways in which this sort of dynamic plays itself out. There have been high school internships, sports teams where newcomers get treated differently from people who know how to play the game, and then various other examples. But on the internet, we should all be on equal ground technically, according to the author of this article. And they referred to the technical versus non-technical people as a form of tribalism. All right, each school year, thousands of new students would flock to Usenet groups for the first time, hoping to find community or learn from the folks already there. The problem was that they didn't really know much of anything, and they did not know even how to use Usenet, how to ask a technical question in a way that would get an answer, rather than having somebody say, "Well, just read the instructions." So the social norms that had been associated with just technical users on Usenet were were changed, and there was a major shift in how online communities were operating. People who were using the Usenet didn't didn't really like to address the questions that were being asked by people who were logging on with their email addresses, and they could tell who was like that and who wasn't. So if you had an AOL.com email address, you were considered a noob and you wouldn't get any kind of respect. But as accessing the internet became easier for the novice users, it was inevitable that some of the social guidelines that had existed before would have to fall by the wayside. And this is not to say that new users would be denied access to internet resources, or in the case of Linux forums, you shouldn't be denied the ability to learn about Linux through the forums and to get a question answered if it hasn't been answered before. But the first reflex in many of the news groups was to flame any user who posted from an online service provider like AOL. So they did not receive a very warm welcome when they came onto Usenet. The reaction didn't necessarily stem from elitism, but from a genuine fear that as more and more users appeared, Usenet, as it had been, was just going to fall apart. And it was a valid concern because there could be fragmentation that would happen. And the original purpose of Usenet, to have technical discussions, could in fact have been lost. So eventually, the association between people with AOL addresses and being noobs began to subside. And it was important. It was in part because of the growth of the internet and the way the internet evolved. So, this same kind of the same kind of looking down on people because of what they use, or dividing into warring camps was also present in the debate between Apple versus Microsoft, open source versus closed source software, and various other things, Dig versus Reddit, and liberals versus conservatives. And that's part of where our current internet flame wars originated from. Excuse me one second. All right. So in many ways, these ideological battles of the digital age only found gasoline with the advent of social media, which helped to better connect people, but failed to account for the side effects that came with all that. So that's how we got to here. But the internet early on played into this tribalism in ways that allowed it to evolve into something that has since become downright dangerous. Newbies could not be forced to accept what we now understand as a central tenet of. Now, I don't even know how to read this word, so I don't care what it is. But what it means is that cyberspace is a place separate from the world and thus free. For it all to work, all the visionaries needed was for everyone to recognize a small set of self-evident truths. Sounds a little bit like what's going on now with non-fungible assets. But anyway, so the term was coined by Bradley Fidler, who was in the Stevens Institute of Technology, and he called it the Eternal October, the understanding that it is no longer possible to pretend that cyberspace can circumvent the politics of civilization. At the time he wrote this, it was October 2016, ahead of a U.S. general election that helped bring in some scary forces we're talking about, you know who and his administration. So the Eternal September is still going on. There's a constant influx of newcomers to the internet, and there's newcomers coming into Linux at all times. More now than at any time in recent memory, partly because of the Windows 11 transition and all those hardware changes that are needed. So more people are interested in Linux, and they are people who don't know much about technology. They don't care to know very much about the technical aspects. They want something that just works the way they're used to with Windows and with Mac. So the spirit that led to the Eternal September becoming a landmark in the first place is still very much there, but it's taken on new forms. And the article goes on to talk about gatekeeping. And that's the idea that because of your identity or lack of experience, you shouldn't have access to an online community or to the information which that community can transmit. There are lots of different kinds of gatekeeping. Technical barriers and other kinds of things are discussed. But in this case, it's going to be cultural gatekeeping, the kind that leaves people out for reasons of elitism, fear, or simply there's some kind of other than us. And if you're not part of the Linux developer community, you might in some forums be considered an outsider, an other. And that is one reason why you might not get the best help in some forums. There are other forums that are a whole lot better about that, by the way. In Twitter, they give an example. They assume anyone who used a mouse to program was a junior programmer, and that got criticized. And they got criticized over it. And there's some other stuff that was in here. In and of itself, having people divide into different communities isn't necessarily inherently bad. We all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and these communities fulfill that need. But where we get into trouble is when we introduce borders, which separate my land from your land, and by extension, my tribe from your tribe. And this is what has happened between liberals and conservatives on many social media platforms. So when the borders are violated, we fight. And this is the root of all war. So Eternal September, in many ways, was the opening salvo in decades of division on the internet. And in the years since, it has only gotten worse. So then it talks about how on social media, people immediately go for the high drama instead of trying to come to some kind of compromise. And by the time the word compromise comes out, it's already too late. And then there was the programmer and IT elitism, and then some of the internet's modern day problems. And then we have, it finally closes by, it finally goes on to mention Godwin's law. And this is about as far as I want to go on this article. And Godwin's law is a meme, and it's known as Hitler analogies. Godwin's law says that that the longer an internet argument goes on, the higher the probability that something or someone will be compared with Adolf Hitler. And basically, it's a logical fallacy, so that as soon as you do that, you've lost the argument. But anyway, that's another thing that you see a lot of on the internet. And by the way, the Rust that they're talking about here is a programming language. So, okay. So that's about it for that article. Yes, it is. So my point is that if you want to participate in forums or ask a question in a Linux help forum, you may need to learn what kind of netiquette they are using in that forum, how you go about asking a question, how you go about reporting something isn't working, and what kinds of technical details they're going to want, what kinds of details they don't want you to include in your description of the problem. They will want you to stick just to the facts and that sort of thing. So that is about everything I had on my agenda. Let me make sure I didn't have anything else. Yeah, that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if we want to have some discussion about how do you get help with Linux and people's experiences with Linux or any other kind of tech support.
I've seen quite a bit of what you're talking about in that article, Matt, since I go back to 1995. And it wasn't just in the Linux area either. I saw a lot of this in Windows. I wasn't into Mac at the time. And other various forums. There was an awful lot of bad flaming of people who probably were in the wrong form to begin with, but they were probably unaware of that at first, and they didn't know where else to turn to get the help they were looking for, and there were too many, I'll call them snobs, that were part of the cultures, variety of cultures out there. And they have just gotten worse in many, many different ways. And I think social media has, by itself, exasperated the whole damn area of trying to have a forum where people can try and solicit help but it doesn't help when you're asking for help, but you don't want to learn anything new. You don't want to learn some of the technical aspects to solve your problem. That usually solicits a lot of the flaming that does occur even today. And that's because, bottom line, if you're not willing to learn something and be able to handle the problem yourself, then you may not be a person who should even have a computer to begin with. You want a toaster. A toaster
Or
is simple. You go
or a
into
phone. Or,
well, not even a phone. A toaster. You go into a store. You buy one. You take it home. You open up the box. You take out the packaging materials. You plug it into the wall outlet, and then you take bread, bagels, muffins, and you play around with the various settings to get it just the way you like it, and then you forget about it until it dies, which could be a decade or more later. Who knows? Depends on how well you take care of the toaster, because periodically they need to be cleaned out. Well, bottom line is, even with CCS's admin machine, there was no maintenance going on for I forget how many years. And we got to change that culture, but at the same time, too, it's not going to be a simple abracadabra. It's the problem solved. And if you're a person who doesn't want to learn computers and get the most out of your computer investment, maybe you got the wrong device to begin with. And it's not so much having a smartphone or a tablet, like a lot of the younger generation may only have those two devices. They don't have a laptop. They don't have a desktop, whether it's a traditional full size or a mini. So you end up with a situation where uh, we're all different. Yes. We all have different interests. Yes. We all have different levels of what we can handle technically. To give you a good analogy, Christmas time. It used to be you had an awful lot of Christmas gifts that say some assembly is required. And a lot of the people who got those packages were at a total loss what the hell to do with it, because they were inept in the knowledge to be able to follow the instructions and assemble whatever it was. So
yeah,
usually it would fall upon either one member of the extended family that was technically astute or mechanically inclined to do those kind of things, or somebody had a neighbor that they knew could handle the stuff and assemble the stuff for them and then get it to whoever Christmas present it was. That still exists today.
yeah. These days, when you buy some of these things that have to be assembled, you can also pay for somebody to come out to your house and assemble it.
Yep.
But
That,
you
that
know,
sort of that sort of reminds me of a Thanksgiving party in the past with the extended family. Now, the house that was hosting it was the house of one of my brother-in-law's brothers, who is an airline pilot for one of the majors that flies around the world. Not a stupid person, but just not supercomputer literate.
All right.
And he was having trouble with his desktop. This was back in late 90s. And he was wondering if he could change the hard drive in it. And he had myself two of my other brother-in-laws were extremely computer savvy, and we asked them to point it out. And in 5 minutes, we had the thing apart on his desk. We cloned the hard drive. We put it all back together, and it was good to go again. And he was just flabbergasted when we actually took the screwdriver and took the damn case off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I just had in May a CCS member that I had to help out. It was originally with just one computer, but he had a second computer that was in terrible shape, and he had some IT experience, but not in computer hardware or anything like that. And it gets into what's called mechanical aptitude, besides mathematics and logic.
Right.
The three cornerstones of computer technology. And the mechanical aptitude is the same as an auto mechanic. Look at these days. You got a four-wheel computer riding around in the streets, and you ride inside of it. So it's one of those weird things where, yeah, I had to walk him through it because he lives a pretty fair distance away from me. It was not practical to drive out there and help him out hands-on. I had to do it all remotely, and I spent more than 40 hours working with him. But we had to do some major overhauling. We changed from a hard drive to a solid state drive on one machine, and then on the other machine, we basically did the same thing with hard drive to solid state, but he also needed a Wi-Fi adapter because it was a desktop, and desktops traditionally don't come with Wi-Fi, and there's only two ways of getting it, and that's with either a Wi-Fi dongle plugged into a USB port, or if you have a more traditional computer instead of a mini, like Bob Premick's Nux, you'd stick in a card,
Yeah.
an old PCI, or these days PCIe X1 card to get the network capability, either upgrading from an old T100 Ethernet to a T1000 gigabit internet, or putting in a card that gave you Wi-Fi capability. And then, in addition, when you plug in the card, if it doesn't come with a mini CD ROM drive with drivers and everything else, you have to have a secondary connection, and you have to know to go into services to turn on your Wi-Fi service as an administrator, because otherwise you've got the hardware in there, even if you got the driver in there, it doesn't work. And that even applies on a desktop with a Wi-Fi dongle that goes into a USB port. If the machine wasn't designed to have Wi-Fi active, such as desktops, then you have to know to go into the services and turn that feature on to make it work.
Yeah.
Bert?
You might like this, Pete. Many years ago, in the 80s, Sears Tower moved to Hoffman Estates.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
I was
employees had to be, they worked on terminals. So they didn't know how to do anything but sit in front of a terminal to be able to use a computer.
Yep.
So the employees, most of them were let go, but they had to be retrained. And I worked for teaching at a Microsoft solution provider at that time. And we taught them how to use a PC and how to use a mouse and play solitaire to be able to get them over the hump to move to a different kind of computer.
I can remember that because I went through that.
Okay, well, we were
Our
really
first
good.
machines were OS2 machines. They
Well,
weren't Microsoft. Our first machines at Hoffman were OS2
Right.
because we were in bed with IBM
Right.
on the board level.
And
We had to go through that thing twice.
Sanford, in his business, he loved OS2.
You know what? As late as 2019, OS2 was still used in the New York City subway system.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Oh,
Anyway,
Another thing, getting back to the Usenet kind of
Yeah.
thing. Back in about 1980, we had computers, proprietary HP computers, and we were able to log in to Unix machines, and we were able to have what was equivalent of like a BBS information between two universities, because it was the universities that held that information, and you could do a query, a search, and get real answers that were technical answers to be able to solve problems back then. But of course, you had to be invited and have to be able to use that kind of a system at the very beginning, before it went public. Later, we did a program with AT&T at one of the SIGs in Hoffman Estate in Mount Prospect, where we had a demonstration of what became the World Wide Web later, from AT&T, and they did a program for us to show us, to see what we thought about it. So all this has evolved for years and years, and CCS has been there all this time, 38 years.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, I've got the references for the articles in chat in case you want to download the references and read for yourself. And what else have we got going on tonight?
So I've got a little bit of experience. I found that the forums that are connected to paid software and paid hardware are way friendlier than the general forums that are out there, because they're monitored by experts that actually pop in right away and try to answer a question first.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how low you are or how well versed you are in the software itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. And that's without getting into the forums. I go to the forums only on a rare occasion. Most of mine, I just do general internet searches. I find articles galore, start reading them, and find out whether there's something there or not. The bad part is a lot of people being less technically oriented is that you have too many people that want a simple, straight answer to a complex problem. And with all the variety of hardware, all the variety of software, how the individual computers are set up, etc., it's like, are you kidding me? That's like saying that we're all identical in every way, shape, or form. That includes gender, that includes race, culture, everything else. We're all of one mind. We all think exactly the same. That's impossible. In fact, I think there's even been a movie where, in a manner of speaking, there was supposedly in the movie such a society, and they were all going crackers because there was no individuality. So you never know what you're asking for. People just don't understand there isn't always a simple answer that's straightforward to get your problem resolved. And too many people give far too little details as to what they're dealing with. And therefore, they don't like it when you're not answering their question, you're asking them questions to get more information before you give them some kind of answer or direction to go in.
Yeah.
And they wanted instantaneous.
Well, I mean, the world has always wanted standardization. In some things, we have to have standardization, like driving a car, perhaps. But in computers, we got these billion people all over the world that connect together. And, you know, as a solution provider, you have to have a certain niche. And so you can be the expert in this niche, and, the other billion niches you aren't.
Right. But
Yeah.
That's just how it is. And the question is, can the person asking the question, be in the right niche so that you can solve?
sure. A woman wanting a beautician isn't going to go to an auto mechanic to get her hair done or a manicure.
I hope
Well, but
not.
all those people use computers.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. People have some strange expectations that kind of blow the mind, and they don't understand that if somebody doesn't understand exactly what their problem is and requires additional information, you got to provide it to try and get some kind of answer or direction. The less information you give them, you end up with no answer. And I've seen a lot of posts where somebody posted a question looking for some help and some guidance, and it's never replied to.
Well, in business, the area that people are working in or the people they're communicating with have to move to the standard. Today maybe that's Teams in many ways for a lot of people, and doesn't mean most of us know really how to use that environment.
Yes,
It's
that's very
just
true.
grown from in the last 2 years from nothing to huge capability.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if 300,000 people use it every day, there's something there that isn't necessary for the home user, or maybe for a kid who's trying to get a date, but they still would like to move that over to a family environment and perhaps make it more comfortable for people. To me, it's not as comfortable as it should be yet.
Oh, it's not by any stretch of the imagination. It's very rough. If you find somebody that gives you the right kind of answers, especially when you're pretty vague on what information you are providing, and that's true with a lot of users of computers. They don't really know what the problem is. They don't know how to describe the problem. And even if they start describing it, uh, unless you're lucky to understand some of the things they're talking about, you misconstrue what the problem is and or what they are trying to tell you because I can't see it. That's why I use remote computing as much as I can. I can see on the user's computer exactly what's going on and get some understanding clearly what's happening and what you might be able to do about it. Whether I do it or I have instruct them how to do it or what. But that seems to be the best avenue for most people is rather than directly in a forum where they can try and get answers to questions or problems. is to find people that can provide good support remotely that aren't trying to sell you something. And too many of them, especially like Geek Squad personnel that might come to your house and set up something for you or repair something for you is also required to try and sell you other goods and services at the same time. I don't like that concept. I think it's a terrible concept. I understand from a business standpoint, you're trying to make all the money and profit you can, but at the same time, mixing the two together can lead to big problems with future sales uh, for that business with that particular customer. And if they talk to their friends and relatives, that turns off more people. Then what do you end up with?
The, the, the issue there, though, is not for the business itself. Is can you charge enough for that call to pay for the expertise you're sending out there?
Oh, yes, I agree. But the bad part there is expectations of the buyer as to knowing up front if I have a tech come out to set stuff up in that, I'm going to have some kind of a surcharge that may be buried in the price, or it may be a separate item so I can see how much I'm having to pay somebody to do this for me.
The other thing is things are temporary. Everything is temporary. Hardware is temporary. Software is temporary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The situation is temporary. I mean, so if we at CCS we started using Quicken around 1993, something like that. Well, we're past it now, but that's it. We just ran as far as we could with it, and it's fine. Now we have other solutions that we can use instead, and it's working. That's just fine for what we need.
Well, there's the other issue too. There's a lot of people, and boy, do I remember this when I'm doing my research, and it still exists today. Uh, as though you're going to buy an item, I don't care what it is, and it's going to last forever. It's never going to change. It's always going to be exactly the same. Well, computers in particular, but almost everything else you can think of is constantly changing and evolving and maturing, etc. I don't think the computer industry really is mature yet. I think it's still far from maturity because there's such upheavals going on in all different aspects of computer technology alone. Uh, I don't think you can classify the computer technology as really being mature. Maybe in mainframes or something like that, it's more mature, but even that's changing dramatically on a constant basis. Look at all the countries that are vying for this year's most powerful supercomputer that exists anywhere.
Well, just take the communication capability. We started with 300 baud modems and moved up, and now we're talking about 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever. I mean, all these things are incremental upgrades along the way, and the hardware and software can be, limitations that were there before get eliminated so that new capabilities can be standard. But technology doesn't end exactly. I mean, we don't have direct connection to our brain yet, so we know everything in the world. And maybe that'll happen someday. You know, we talk about rings, we talk about watches, we talk about computers and phones. The fact that we're up to phones as being the most practical, portable communication device is standardized the whole world, and it updates every year.
That's right.
So it never ends, and it won't end until, communication isn't important.
It won't end until the sun goes supernova.
Yeah,
Well,
because
that too.
I mean, it's a crazy situation, and a lot of people just don't want to accept change. The resistance to 11 is high, but then it was very high going from XP to Vista, even to 7. Eventually, 7 won out, but then going to 8, 10, now 11. There's rumors, and it's only rumors. There might be a Windows 12 under development. Who knows?
Of course there is. I mean, these
There is.
companies are a business.
That's right.
Microsoft has 180,000 employees. They're
Right.
doing something.
Well, same with Apple and Linux is different model. It's not a big conglomerate like Google, Microsoft, Apple, etc. It's all the independents and smaller companies spread out across the planet, all doing their own little thing, making improvements here and there. And software is always playing a catch up game to the hardware. And all hardware requires drivers that will allow the operating system to communicate with that hardware. And it's always buggy or very inefficient to begin with. That's why you got to keep upgrading. And
Well,
and this even applies to BIOS. There are people who don't want to touch BIOS. I remember the way BIOS used to be. It was a nightmare. These days, it's very easy to do. And when I bought a computer, maybe it recognized 2 GB memory modules, and you only had 2 or 4 slots. Okay, but a BIOS came along and says, "Oh, we now also recognize with this BIOS update 4 GB memory modules. I can double my memory just by changing out the old 2 GB modules with 4s. That makes a big difference."
back in 74, when I started this stuff, it became apparent that we would have computer boards. They were big boards then. And the next level up was they put 2 things on one board. Then they put 2 more things on one board. So now we're at the point where in your thumbnail, you've got the whole world. And so all the things about drivers and standardization will get passed because the technologies will change so that none of that is needed. Remember, we started out with mainframes, then mini computers, then we went to personal computers, and now we're back to networks where everything's connected to that cloud in the sky.
Which is a
And
server.
so all these things changed, and we're not going to, everything is temporary. Anything about hardware drivers and all that is important today. But, 10 years from now, it won't be important
Right.
because there'll be different technologies that'll surpass it, and all that'll be in the cloud, and nothing that anybody has to handle will just be, we're almost there now, all browsers.
Yeah. And more of it's going that way. There's Windows as a service for enterprise, whereby you just have a terminal, and it's kind of like having access to the internet. The difference is you have a terminal up on some mainframe somewhere that looks exactly like a personal computer right on your desktop.
Well, that gets back to what happened with the Sears Tower stuff, where the people had had only worked on a terminal. Now they can, when we get to what you just talked about, they'll work on a terminal, but it'll have a mouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a touchscreen.
Well, most of the doctor's offices use that. They use dumb terminals, and everything connects to the server in the main portion, or in the hospital, or in the insurance company.
Well, I used to make systems for doctor, and we did stuff local, and then they had to take whatever we made and then also process it to the hospital. At that time, they couldn't get it to the hospital fast enough because the hospital systems were so slow that they couldn't synchronize.
Well, all technology changes because there's always somebody that's going to figure out a faster or easier way of doing the same thing. And then somebody says, nah, that's too complicated, too complex. Let's make it simpler and simpler and simpler. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, in the CPA world, we would have our shows, and when Quicken started, we gave away free copies of Quicken to everybody, all the CPAs at the show. I was there coordinating that. And, so time just keeps going. Later, they went ahead and created QuickBooks, and I coordinated with them on that too. Now they're moving from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks in the cloud and trying to get rid of the desktop.
Right. Most of them are, even your tax software services are doing basically the same thing. They have been moving that way for years.
The one advantage to the corporation that's providing it, if it's in the cloud, they can update the cloud server, and they don't have to worry that everyone is not on the same page at the desktop. I get about 2 updates a month on my Autodesk, because Fusion 360 is basically you have a local copy, and then you have everything stored out on the cloud. So I don't have to take a file from the house to the workshop, or from the workshop. If I close it out here, I open it up at the house, I got everything the same.
Right.
So basically the files and the applications are up there. I just have a local copy, so I don't have to.
Well, Adobe's been doing that same concept for years.
Yeah.
And now Office has been doing it with
Yeah.
Microsoft, et cetera, and Google Docs, et cetera. Well, I think we ought to call it a night, folks.
Let me throw in one more thing. The one limitations that still exist that haven't been overcome are electricity and internet communication. If we lose either of those, we have nothing.
Well,
Just wait till the next big solar flare.
well, the one
I said that.
the one positive thing that's
Harold do it.
going on is shrinking of the chips. That's reducing the power consumption, except in one major area, the high-end graphics that the gamers want. You got a whole supercomputer just in a graphics card, and everything else is there just to support that.
Well, we have a lot of battery power, but if the power goes out, 2 days and that'll be gone.
Yep, or less. Depends on the power consumption of that device.
So until we start overcoming those limitations, we haven't really done anything but make incremental advances.
That's right. And
You got to get away from copper.
Well, I mean, we got some promising technologies coming. Metal lithium batteries sound very hopeful. They're not here yet, but especially for computing devices that are mobile, I think that's the next big thing coming on those mobile devices.
But they'll still have to be charged.
Yeah.
Just get a Tesla wall or an electric vehicle.
That will not
They
help.
can run your whole house for about a week
Well, I remember Al had power out for about a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't he have a generator?
Don't know.
Even then, you still got to have gas to run it.
Well,
Well,
usually
that's
they run off
usually
of
an
natural
easier
gas
matter.
these days. Like Generac, they'll hook up to your gas line, and it'll kick in and run off of the natural gas.
Yeah, but if you
The
get a
real
big
question
solar,
There's still pumps pumping the natural gas.
yeah, if you get a big solar flare, that could go out.
Everything will go out because it will fuse the copper lines everywhere.
It could.
until each
All
house
right.
has its own independent electric capability,
Mhm.
power capability, nothing is going to change. The fact that we have all these wires that, electric wires everywhere or cable wires everywhere are just the wrong thing.
Absolutely true.
Well, I think we ought to call it a night.
Yeah. Anyway, I have to because I have a meeting in the morning. If you guys want to carry on, you may.
Well, I got a meeting too, but mine ain't until 11 o'clock.
Your time.
Yes.
Mine's at 10
It's
o'clock
only-
my time. Mine's at,
It's only 4 o'clock my time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
All
mine's at
right.
like 10 o'clock my time.
Let's call it quits for the night.
Okay.